Mohannad is a mechanical engineer by training and holds multiple certifications, including PMP, Learn Six Sigma Black Belt, CSCP, and SCORE DC, and it is an authorized, and he is an authorized trainer for Association of Supply Chain Management. During the presentation, you will gain valuable industry insights on supply chain transformation and learn practical strategies of overcoming common challenges from a learning expert. Please join me to welcome Engineer Mohannad Gomaa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thuraya, for the introduction, and Ray and Aisa and Yusuf, thank you so much, and Ibrahim, thank you so much for having me here today, and hopefully this would be a value-add presentation that would bring in value to all of the members, and looking forward to do more if you think this one worked out well. But I'm excited here for a lot of reasons, because I'm among also a lot of friends, and you know, some of them always debate what is supply chain, and they ask me all the questions about supply chain, as you can imagine, and it's always interesting, you know, to see what their perspective supply chain. And I think it's the same thing here. We are definitely all engineers, and you know, whether you know you decide to whatever you do, I'm sure somehow in an engineering practice you touch upon some of the supply chain aspects. So we're gonna go through that. I'm gonna basically, I build this agenda to highlight for supply chain practitioners what is supply chain. We'll definitely be interested to get you more into the strategy and segmentation and the planning aspect of it, which my core experience in. And then we'll talk about the role of technology and trends in supply chain today and how it's evolving, and some of the key challenges in supply chain as we see them, and I'm sure you can relate to them, whatever industry you're in. And then the future of supply chain, what does that mean? And what are the key, you know, themes that we're seeing in the market, and how they play in every day's business, basically. Then would love definitely to see how you would get involved in supply chain, and how, you know, we'll explore some of those ideas together. And then happy to take any questions at the end, just because of the sheer of attendees here today. Probably it would be best if we hold those questions till the end. But very excited to definitely get started, and hopefully I'll stay on time as well. So as I mentioned, you know, the objective of this session, I want to make sure that I cater to engineers and non-supply chain professionals. But hopefully, you know, for supply chain professionals who are on the call, they would find some value as well in some of the practice that I have in there, that would, you know, help them, you know, rethink their supply chain, some of the elements, whether it's the process, the strategy, the technology, the performance enablers. A lot of these are key areas that we definitely all need, and it's always great to brush on a lot of these. And hopefully you'll enjoy the, you know, the presentation, and hopefully it will be of value. So I guess you know, it's not that long time ago that we all sort of, you know, relate to those events and what happened at those events, you know, whether, you know, you're out in the market to get an appliance or a car, and you got affected by the semiconductor shortage that happened in 2021. If you're not familiar with the event, it was basically a huge shortage in production delays because of COVID that caused a lot of those factories, microchip factories, to really ramp down on the production. As a result, that affected a lot of the, you know, companies that buy those semiconductors, mainly automobile and electronics. The cause of it and the challenge was basically a lot of supply chain disruptions that happened. Some of it had to do with planning, some of it with inventory, some of it had to do with how we're globally connected with those suppliers and how those vulnerabilities came alive when something like this happened and how it, that trickle effect was massive. We also remember during the pandemic, what we heard about the logistic disruption that happened. You know, the major delays in ports that happened between here in the US and China. If you open the news, you would hear about the LA port where, basically containers were in people's front yard because there was no space for them to put those containers. It was the rush, it was the bottleneck in the at the ports that definitely impacted everything that we bought at the shelf. And again, this was definitely one of a kind, but again, it goes to the planning element and how did that had a direct effect on today's on everything in terms of where we when we expected our merchandise to arrive, how companies behave differently in terms of how they become resilient with that bottleneck, whether through other ports, whether a different mean of transportation. So there were all kind of creative, ideas on how we flex around this, how they flex around us. Also, if you remember the iPhone when it first started, the challenge that came, it was basically a demand supply issue where they didn't anticipate that much of a demand that's going to come. And as a result, it was the manufacturing planning, it was the supplier coordination for the parts, it was a lot of things. So those are, examples that highlights different elements within supply chain. As you can imagine, we touched on manufacturing, we talked about suppliers, talked about logistics. It's not one area like logistics where everybody thinks it is. It's always much more than that. In today's, market, we're even hearing about new ones. Not long time ago, we had that U.S. sports strike, right? And I know we have, on the call people who work in this, in those sports, and they would tell you how they were affected and how that rush caused, that pause caused a lot of disruption in the warehouses, in revenues that came into industries that were expecting to get their stuff in. So it definitely caused, close to $4 billion a day in loss for a lot of companies. And we're seeing the same thing happen today. This month, ABB just announced, that they are going to have a new investment coming in production here in the U.S. as a result of the impact of tariffs. And that's a move that we're seeing. We're seeing also Apple, moving 600 tons or something in iPhones, which was very interesting because they wanted to make sure that they secure their inventory. So how companies behave to combat those kind of changes or disruption in the market is very interesting. And it will continue to be whatever the case or the topic du jour, it will always going to be a different element of challenge for industries, and how companies react to that. It's all part of a strategy. So before we get into strategy, I just want to make sure that I define some of the elements of supply chain, because depends on who you talk to, and if you listen to the news, most of the time they relate supply chain to logistics, but it's much more. It's more about the relationship that you as a company, with your customers and customers, and with your supplier and suppliers. Okay, that relationship, whether it's upstream the supply chain or downstream the supply chain, it's always a factor of the information they use. So you can imagine information has to do with inventory, cash, definitely, SKUs numbers, all of that. And this information, how fast was one and how much you share with your suppliers and your customer is a factor of what industry you're in and how much you want to collaborate with your suppliers. So it's always the those dimensions that really shapes the extension of the extent of the supply chain of an organization or the nucleus organization. When you talk about supply chain, it's actually, this is called the SCORE model, which is the supply chain operation reference model. And it's meant to dissect the elements of supply chain again. So as you can see, you have the planning side, you have the source side, the buy side, you have the transform side, which is basically make, but we call it transform because transform can also be a service, not just production. We have the order and the fulfillment side. So now it's broken. Before that, it was deliver. Just because there is a lot of elements in the order side and the fulfillment side on the logistics side that need more and more granularity, and there's a lot of systems around each one of them in terms of how they integrate, in terms of the value that they bring to the supply chain. And of course, you have return. The whole return process is becoming a very important part in the supply chain because it's driven by customer satisfaction. It's driven by a lot of agendas, including sustainability, that encourages return, and there's a hierarchy for those returns in terms of how you dispose those returns or how you reuse them, and we'll be talking about this. So, and then in the middle, you see that orchestrate. The orchestrate is what we learn about business strategy, business rules, sustainability. A lot of those practices has to do with how do you really manage or govern the whole process, all those processes together, so that they would be truly integrated, that they would push the end-to-end visibility agenda, and they would define the corporate governance on how you manage your supply chain. So these are basically the elements of supply chain. Make sense? And then, this is your typical supply chain. Sorry. In terms of, when you think about it again, it all starts with a business strategy and how companies define their business strategy that then leads into, how they plan. And when we say integrated business planning, it's a technical term in terms of what define planning and what are the extent of planning. So we have demand planning, we have supply planning, demand planning on the sales side, on the R&D side, or in the MPI or new product introduction side. How does that integrate with the supply planning? Supply planning is not just manufacturing, it's the logistics, it's the inventory, all of those elements in there. And then financial planning, it's very important when we're talking about this. How is that integrated into the planning practice? It's key because it's not just moving products, it's how you move them and how you make them profitable as well. So that has to be aligned with the financial element. And then you have the operation planning part, which, when you dig down into manufacturing, there's a lot of elements in planning on a monthly level, on an annual level, on a monthly level, on a weekly level, on a daily level. So how you make sure that this plan is executed and how you make sure that the strategy is executed based on the plan is key and is very interesting practice when you look deep into what's involved, and we're going to look into that as well. But again, as you can see here from your typical supply chain, you source, you buy material or services, and then you make them, and how you make them, it's different from industry to another. You can make to stock, you can make to order, you can engineer to order if you're in aerospace, for example. There's a lot of elements into that. And then when you do that, you either deliver you have the deliver element to it, which is your inbound and outbound logistics, your last mile delivery. So there is a lot of element in the deliver, as you can imagine, as well, and the tactics and the strategies behind it on what makes sense for this industry. With any supply chain, there's always a distribution network. So within that distribution network, it's always a function of how many distribution warehouses do we need to have? Do we need to own them or not? Can we share them with our peers or competitors or not? Or do we have our own? Do we do consignment? Do we do vendor managed inventory, VMI? These are also other decision points that supply chain has to take when they define their supply chain and execute their supply chain. And then you have the sell element. And in today's market, it's interesting, right? Because we're seeing a lot of new business models. We see a lot of consumer product goods companies they're using D2C, which is direct to customer. It's a new model where basically you have, from PepsiCo to other, Krispy Kreme. Others are looking to sell directly to customer. And it's not just food, it's electronics, it's everything else. That channel that opens the door for, or that model that allows CPG companies to sell directly to you is involving a lot of things that they need to change in the business model. Now they have access to customers directly. How do they, set up that customer service? How do they set up that last mile delivery? How do they really analyze what customers are buying and do better segmentation? This is very different from the brick and mortar market, where, you have retail there. You have the Walmarts, you have the Targets, or you have your own brand, like, what Nike did. Nike pulled out from JCPenney's, from others, and they decided that they would go directly to customers. So they opened their own brick and mortar market, retail stores. That's completely different, ballgame in terms of how they plan, how they source, how they deliver, how they integrate their platforms across their stores as well. You have the drop shipping model right now from the manufacturer again to the customer. Completely different supply chain. So it's always a function of who, what, why, how many, when, and where to make a happy customer at the end. This is basically how supply chains are designed and how companies compete based on whatever value proposition that they have that would bring the product close to the customer, more customized to the customer preference and value and markets. So that's mainly how it is. And then, because again, we have a lot of construction, engineers and civil engineers and architects here, I'm sure you can relate to a lot of those questions. You have your own supply chain, from project inception, in terms of how you plan, how you design for your project, how you procure your material, many suppliers that you have, whether they're service suppliers or material suppliers, how it's important for you to optimize those procurement processes and how to have those processes available for you in the right time at the right job site, right? And how you really manage that manage your inventory is always important, because you can have your dedicated material for a specific project, but you always have the indirect, that's basically across different projects. How do you optimize that inventory? How do you become more intelligent about, what to buy and where to buy them from is important. Do you buy inshore or from inshore or offshore is also another element that you always feel in your lead times, and you have to plan for it in lead times. How you segment your suppliers, you have your A suppliers, B suppliers, C suppliers. How do you develop that redundancy in the system so that you cannot depend on one supplier is important. Then, all the way to, when you think about quality control inspection, again, you have your own elements in this process that have to do with sustainability, with waste, that you have to report to, other than the technical pieces of it. But again, how do you really define those? How do you ensure that you're measuring the right things, the right sustainability aspects? Are you gonna only focus on the environmental aspect of sustainability, or the economic aspect of sustainability, or the social part of the sustainability? Those are elements that together they compose that sustainability agenda, And how do you really balance the environmental with the economics is becoming very important, not just in construction, but across. So you can, I'm sure you all can relate to those type of questions pertaining to your supply chain. There are different industries with more specialized supply chain, as you can imagine, whether it's humanitarian or disaster relief. You know, when you look at FEMA, you know, how they deploy that supply chain pretty quick, how they order materials, how they have boots on the grounds, how do they really procure in a distressed area. It's a completely different supply chain. When you look at hospitals, same thing. You know, hospitals have a supply chain. It's more about resilience. It's more about, you know, how you have right stocks, and the right stocks, not overstock, not understock, so that you would serve your patients. You know, everything from billing to distribution is very unique in the healthcare industry. Retailers, when you look at retail industry is, you know, the most interesting supply chain ever, and every company has their own case study in terms of how, you know, they set up their supply chain. You have, you know, the Amazon model definitely um, is 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 always a case study, whether about their demand forecasting, whether about their delivery and their expansion, business expansion, all the way to the last mile now. It's very interesting and how they pace that. Aerospace and defense supply chain is very unique. You know, it's all about, you know, availability of the asset, and how you can make sure that you're performing the, you know, you set up the right supply chain for multiple redundancies and swiftness of response as well. Luxury goods have their own, you know, unique supply chain as well. You know, one of my clients in luxury goods industry, they would not ship by train or by ship. It has to be by airplane. You know, so this definitely entails a different supply chain, not just the logistics part, but everything from the storage, from the volume quantities they order, and so forth. F&B supply chain is yet another very interesting, you know, industry. You know, whether when you look at PepsiCo, Coke, Mondelez, and others, they all have their unique, you know, supply chain in terms of how do they ensure food safety, how do they have their snacks or beverages on shelf at the right time with the right so that it would meet specific timeline criteria, since it's perishable goods. So that's always a unique industry to look out for, and how they are set up. And of course you have other industries, you know, whether it's high tech, electronics, fashion. Always, you know, it's always interesting when you look at the Zara model, which is one of the um, key supply chain models. You know, you'd be surprised how they do that. They go from design to shelf in 20 days. So how do they do that, and how they got it streamlined? And that's globally, from design, from sketches to manufacturing to distribution to shelf, is quite interesting, as that's the value proposition. When you look at pharma as well, it's very interesting. You know, whether Merck or Pfizer or any of them, they always have unique supply chains, especially around the cold chain. You know, when you have, by regulation, you have to have, you know, tracking and regulatory and custody of the products across the supply chain, and how they measure temperature to ensure that throughout the journey of, you know, the molecule, it's tracked and traced and until it's actually packaged to the customer. Very unique supply chain. So how do companies start doing that? And what is the right goal to do that? So this is an example of, you know, how I reach out to my customers and help them define their supply chain strategy. And this is an example of a consumer product goods company, right? Their business value drivers, or the business strategy, is so focused on freshness. We want to make sure that our products are fresh on the shelf. You can imagine, you can translate that freshness into lead times, into how fast they need to go from, farm to table, and what are the elements within the supply chain that you need to adjust to make that happen. Traceability, same thing, when you want to track the source of your ingredients, which is very important in food and beverage. It's about the safety of your food. It's about, the source of your food as well that matters to the market. So how can we track the source and ensure that we show our customers or consumers where we source from? And this is when you see in advertisement how certain companies publicize their source, and they are sure of their source, and how that's one of their key supply chain element, that they're able to track from farm to table where they're getting it from. In fact, a lot of CPG companies, or food and beverage companies specifically, they have very tight controls over the farms, whether it's the coffee beans, whether it's the bananas, whether it's any product. Basically, it's about how you can trace those elements. Availability, this is a company that want to make sure that the shelf is always have their product. The customer cannot go shopping without having or knowing for sure that the product is going to be on shelf. So how do you ensure that you have the right inventory levels? How you how you ensure that you have redundancy again in your system that would allow to compensate for any accident that would happen to one node within the supply chain, to be able to fulfill the product at the end of the day. So when you look at all those business drivers, freshness, traceability, availability, and there's more for sure, but they're very focused, on a specific industry. So how do you tie this in a business language, to supply chain value levers? So we always dissect it by looking at the top line in terms of revenues, how we can increase revenue, how we can also reduce COGS, or cost of goods sold, the bottom line saving, and how we optimize our working capital. So, and of course, there's always going to be process and improvement initiatives. So you start translating those, financial drivers from the business into supply chain element. If we really want to focus on increasing our revenue, then we definitely want to be improving on our forecast. We want to optimize our revenue. We want to make sure that we have enough of those products always on the shelf. And forecasting, I don't know if everybody or anybody is looking at forecasting, but it's a big deal now. The art of forecasting is very interesting, and it's getting very sophisticated. It's not what we sold last year or last month. It's much more than that, and we'll dig into that later. But the fact that you tie those value levers to your financial and business value drivers is very important, and that what really makes the difference. And again, as you can see, this is where usually I come up with the recommendation in terms of what kind of initiatives that you would need to tie those value levers to make them happen. And based on a business case analysis that we do, is how we quantify the benefits for the business, whether it's 3% increase in sales, back to just looking into forecasting, or 15% inventory reduction when we look at inventory management, which happens a lot, or even implementing any of those systems improvements that we look at. Just analyzing your total cost of ownership is one of them. How to manage risk, another one. How do you manage your obsolescence, another one. So the business case, it really depends on the business size and SKU size and so many other elements that we go in there. So when we talk about strategy, you can imagine that it entails a lot of thinking in terms of how do we behave, okay? How can we become, what model should we use? And there is, as ASCM defines it, there are three three key performance attributes that we look at. You know, it's resilience, it's economics, and sustainability. Within those performance attributes, they are then dissected, those segments. So a company that's looking for reliability, you know, when you look at reliability, you can think again, or resilience in general, you can think of pharma. You know, you have to be able to perform your task as required, indeed, in terms of you cannot miss a delivery. You cannot have a product out of shelf. Responsiveness is another attribute for, it could be pharma, but as you can imagine, you know, there are industries that are so focused on speed. When you look at Amazon, you know, the responsiveness of how they dispatch the product to you is very interesting. So when you focus on responsiveness, you're really tuning all of your supply chain elements so that they would be focused on speed. Okay. When Amazon focused on responsive and they use this as one of their, you know, strategies and and segments for specific products, they revamped their whole forecasting. You know, their forecasting is more on the predictive side. So predictive forecasting is more of, as soon as it's in your cart, believe it or not, it's in a distribution center next to your door next to your house before you even push the button and buy it. This is how responsive it is. You have examples of agility in supply chains, where agility is very important for a lot of industries because you cannot break the supply chain, and under any influences that can happen. It's a pandemic, no pandemic, this supply chain has to survive. You know, when you look at the aerospace industry, when you look at the CPG industries as well, when you look at your 3PLs or logistics like UPS or FedEx, they're not gonna go, you know, they're not gonna stop because it's raining or because there are hurricanes or anything. So how do you again adapt that that strategy, and how you segment which parts of your business that needs that? There are companies that are more cost conscious, and they operate their supply chain accordingly. When you look at AB InBev, they have a very clear, you know, model about managing by cost. When you look at Walmart, same thing. So it's how they procure the material they procure, how they move, how they set up the number of distribution centers that they have, the you know the look and feel of everything that they produce, and how they replenish as well. So that cost factor is important. So, and you have also the, you know, the sustainability part. You know, the sustainability is becoming more and more interesting. So there are companies, the value proposition is all about environmental. When you look at companies like Patagonia, for example, that make clothes, uh, their whole value proposition is about how can they source you know, organic or clothing that basically are more environmentally friendly, and that's why people love them and why they buy them. When you look at what Apple has announced, you know, a year ago with their sustainability program, and I was involved in Apple in one of their sustainability program, which, you know, you cannot talk about Apple, but how serious it is that they are moving their scope 3 focus into their suppliers is very interesting. How they're moving their audits from, you know, just reporting, periodic reporting, to real-time reporting is very interesting. And there's a lot of elements. So at the end of the day, I want to depict to you that the importance of how companies segment their supply chain and how it's vital in the business, because whatever that direction is, whatever that strategy is, it's how companies invest in how their supply chain behave. And when there is no strategy, you see a lot of, you know, those elements are working against each other. You know, you would see sales stocking a lot of inventory, but then the financials is, you know, is really worried about their profitability and their working capital on the balance sheet. So this is a good example of how important that the strategy has to be tuned to the market, and everybody's aligned across the supply chain in terms of what strategy to adapt. And then we talk about the integrated business planning part. Okay. So when you talk about planning is very it's a very mature practice in a lot of companies that really understand the link between how they should really link the demand side and the supply side, but also the financial side. As I mentioned, when you look at demand planning, you're not just looking at sales, you're not just looking at forecast, you're not just looking at account planning and revenues that are coming. You look at forecast, you look at promotion management and what makes sense to make promotion, those discounts, and how they're going to affect the top line. When you look at NPIs, new product introductions, it's also important to have that engaged in demand planning at the early stage within the product development, because it's going to come the pipeline, and the supply side would have to make sure that they're factoring that in. On the supply side, when they do supply, when demand makes their plan, they bounce it against the supply side to make sure that we have the right material, we have the right production lines, we have the right inventory planning in terms of stocks that we have. Do we need to make or not, or do we have enough materials? And then transportation planning. So this is those elements from production, procurement, inventory, transportation are truly everything that has to be supplies, not just manufacturing. So how do you link all of these people together to make sure that they are unified on one forecast, one plan? And then when you have that consensus in terms of what they produce, how do you check that with finance? Because again, part of sustainability or not, but it's all about how you really focus on margins. It's not about selling volumes. When you have that sales guy coming, saying that I sold today, I will win $1 million, order, and this is gonna suck most of this month production, let's say. We really need to stress test because against other orders, not based on volume, but based on margins, because it makes a huge difference in terms of how you allocate your resources, your capacity to one order versus another. So those checks on the finance side are becoming very integrated in today's supply chain. Cost to serve, profitability, all of those other elements. And in the same time, it has to be aligned with the business strategy. Because again, if demand decide to produce or sell to this client versus that client, they want to make sure that this is in line with what the strategic direction was about. We want to make sure that this is what we agreed on our business plan we can achieve. When you have those executive review meetings, it's very interesting dynamics when you see the CEO and the CFO and the CEO discuss how are they really going to make that plan work or not? Is it viable or not? What if scenarios that we can look at? What are the scenario plans that you guys looked at, and what are the risks, values, what are the risks, what are the profitability, what are the operation elements out of it? When I sit in those meetings, it's interesting how the dynamics is from a financial standpoint, in terms of how CEOs have better visibility to decisions are made on the operation level. Something like, how come we expedited this shipment for $70,000 a month? This is eating from our margin. Maybe it was easier for a sales guy to make the order to be delivered faster because you want to please their client, but it definitely didn't add value and definitely hurt the business in terms of profitability. So it's a checkpoint in terms of how you really get everybody across functions to agree on the right plan and how to execute that plan. Shifting from the business aspect of supply chain, there's always the technology aspect of supply chain. And the technology aspect of supply chain and how it evolved is very interesting. So what this is a digital capability model that ACM has built. It was created with Deloitte and ASM, and ASM has the IP, own the IP now. And what it does is basically it serves as a guide for supply chain professionals and technology professionals who are looking to invest in supply chain technology. So how do you develop the right digital supply network? What capabilities that we need to build in terms of system to improve our supply chain? There are technologies that are focused on connected customers, as you can imagine. These has to do with CRMs, customer relationship management, has to do with a lot of the bots that you see that are powered by AI. How companies invest in this is very strategic in terms of what value they bring to the customer. Remember, every time you talk about supply chain, it's always the customer at the front. You know, like one of my clients talk, you know, you can do whatever we do, but do no harm to your customer. So what does that mean? How do you serve your customer through the right channels? How you provide that level of service? These are the kind of systems that really focus on that, even on personalizing experience. It's very important. How do you set up technologies that are focused on product development? You know, from design to, you know, to manufacturing. It's, you know, it's a 3 or a 4 phase process. But how you drive that innovation, not just within your nucleus company, but with your suppliers as well. How you digitize that. How do you manage the product life cycle of a product is very tuned, and there's a lot of systems that involves that ties to smart operations and others. So it's all about how you set up those systems and the requirements that are connected with others. You also have a lot of system about synchronizing planning, whether it's Kinaxis, whether it's an ERP system, you know, Kinaxis and a APS system or a ERP system like SAP or Oracle. How do you really integrate the supply, demand, and financial planning together? How do you align them? How do you drive the right analytics? It's very important, and it's another area within supply chain that there's a lot of technology in there. Intelligent supply. I mean, in today's market, it's you know, how we use AI and machine learning to improve our forecast is very key. It's all about how you really tie those, have those technologies run your scenarios for forecasting. And when I talk about forecasting, it's not just, again, like I mentioned, it's not last year's, you know, sales. It's how are my forecast is going to adjust based on weather, based on geopolitical issues, based on delays, a ship got stuck in a canal. All of that feeds into the forecast in a dynamic forecast that adjusts accordingly as well to the supply chain and the element supply chain. So you'd be surprised how agile, you know, the forecasting can be in a lot of industries that really a delay in one product can make a huge difference in an order delivery, and how companies can use that information then to you know, to run different scenarios on where to get those products, how to use from their stock, and so forth. So there's a lot of intelligence here that that goes in intelligent supply type of technologies. Smart operations. I mean, if you've been around manufacturing or a warehouse and how automated they are right now, and how those machines through MES, manufacturing execution system, are linked to a lot of those systems. So how those machines are actually are geared to adjust their pace and their capacity based on orders. How do they drive operation efficiency? How can they, you know, you get information about the life of an asset in terms of when that next maintenance needs to happen, so that you can, and how it adjusts its production cycle or production schedule to factor that in for engineers. Dynamic fulfillment, you know, the automation right now between between your distribution centers and then how to optimize and fulfill your order from the right distribution center is very key, especially for big companies for sure, where they have different nodes. So how you refulfill that kind of optimization, and how do you do demand allocation right? How do you put the right SKUs in the right place? When I was doing a project for Wolverine, for example, they were looking into how can they improve that part. We have a lot of stores and we have a lot of SKUs. Most of the time we see SKUs going in the wrong store because whomever did the forecast didn't really tie it to specific geography, or they just based it on bulk forecast. So how do you really distribute and you have that dynamic fulfillment so that, when you have an order that's fulfilled, what's the best node? When Amazon fulfill your product, they have to see what's the best, route for it to procure it and to fulfill it for you. So how do you optimize all of that? There's a lot of elements, and I wish I can show you more into the connection between that. But at the end, this is what you look at. This is almost what today's supply chain is like when it comes to technology and the roadmap. When you look, again, this is one of my clients, but it's how they how they develop a strategy to pace their technology development, how they need to focus on big data and automation, how do they need to focus on technologies and have an agenda for only technologies that drive efficiencies, and then how we can reimagine other roles in the supply chain and those disruptive technology that comes later. But again, you can see how there is a lot of interesting technologies that connects the supply chain from farm to cash to store. When you talk about control towers, and everybody has a definition of what a control tower is, but control towers now, it's becoming a very interesting capability for companies to provide that end-to-end visibility to the supply chain. They're able to sense what's their inbound, raw materials going to look and have visibility of it, and be able to do the analytics based on when are they coming and all of that, and integrate that information into their manufacturing, into their logistics, warehousing, all the way to the store. The analytics that goes there is also, it's about how effective you move that stuff, how you make it. When you look at the manufacturing, now if you go into manufacturing, you'd be surprised how technology is enabling from the factory floor machineries for sure, but how those systems are working together. AGVs, or automated guiding vehicles, used to be a sci-fi type of technology, maybe, I don't know, 20 years ago, and the cost of them were high. Now you go to pretty much a lot of warehouses, and you'd be very interested to see how building the infrastructure for AVs is becoming down, and how a lot of those vendors are willing to invest in warehouses to build the infrastructure as well for those AGVs to run, and how efficient it is, from the ordering, from the packing, from the picking. All those processes are automated right now. And then the technology here is becoming more and more interesting in terms of demand sensing. When you look at the Walmart, the second you pick something from Walmart in the cashier, it sends an EDI signal to your distribution center to fulfill it next day. When you go to the Walmart at 12 a.m., you will see them open those boxes. Look at those boxes. You will see assortments. You will see 2 Tylenols. You'll see one Advil. You will see one Johnson & Johnson shampoo. They are replenishing by item. And, this is the beauty of how they translate this information from the cashier to the distribution to their suppliers, whether it's P&G, whether it's PepsiCo, whether it's any company, to replenish accordingly. This is how Walmart is known for their distribution model as well. It's very unique. The cross-docking, on how they carry no inventory and how they dispatch those trucks directly in one small hub directly to stores is very impressive. So again, how to connect all of these is very important. One of the other functions of control tower is to manage risk, scenarios. I mean, how you track orders all the way to store is very important. So very quickly, I'll share the clip because I think it's very interesting and it would portray some of that so that you can imagine and you would get some rest from my voice as well. Let me know if you can see this.
This is how to get in shape.
The best way to boost your metabolic rate and get in shape is not keto, it's not paleo.
Yeah.
Okay. Command, I'm getting an alert. It appears we have insufficient inventory to fulfill an incoming order.
Production, what's going on?
We're predicting schedule changes due to unplanned weather conditions.
Analytics?
Forecasts show a storm hitting in 24 hours. Social listening confirms the track, and sensitivity models are predicting asset downtime due to flooding and workforce limitations.
Delays in delivery of raw materials could cause capacity loss of up to 26%.
Production, what can we do?
Running alternative production scenarios now. Our best option is to add capacity at the Northeast plant. An overtime shift would meet demand at positive margin impact. The problem is raw material inventory is too low for additional production.
Supply, if we did go into overtime, is there anything you can do to get the raw materials there in time?
Scanning inventory positions in storage and in transit. I've got raw materials on their way, but 5 days out. Wait. There's material in a warehouse we could get there in 2 days if we ship by air.
We've got clear weather on that route and a 150-knot tailwind, which will save on fuel.
We got raw materials in 2 days. We could make the order on time and stay within margin thresholds.
Exceptions. Can we make this call to go into overtime and divert materials?
Verifying this is within our tolerance to make a decision automatically. Command, we're good to go. No need to escalate to the supply chain planner.
Okay, Digital Supply Network. Let's do it.
All right. A little bit dramatic, but hopefully it served the purpose. So again, this is a good example of a control tower and what it does. It's very interesting. I like that video. It's you believe it or not, it's not. Yes, it is a little bit of a Hollywood action movie, but this is basically how it goes in terms of how connected production, inventory, procurement, customer service to execute and have visibility to those kind of events. So this is how companies thrive to build that visibility, end-to-end visibility, real-time visibility, as we call it, across our supply chain. With that, there's definitely, I know everybody's keen on technology trends in supply chain. And I think this, what we talked about is not far from what we're looking at. I mean, whether it's AI for sure, or machine learning, there's been a lot of adoption in AI in supply chain, mainly around forecasting, demand forecasting and predicting demand, and how you can sift through a lot of information. Again, a lot of factors beyond last year or last month sales. It's a lot of elements in there, external elements into there, and every forecast has its unique algorithm that brings value based on industries. So that's one element that AI has been implemented. Inventory management and inventory optimization is definitely another area where companies can definitely look into how they optimize their inventory. Should they make the stock, make the order? What's their safety level? Safety stock should be like, what the measures are. We're talking about a very, basic scenario here, but the elements that goes into automating the configuration that goes into how much to stock and where to allocate this skewed to which customer and all of that. It's very important. Blockchain, it's very interesting how blockchain, I mean, it's, you know, it's not a new technology, but the evolvement of it is interesting, and the adaptability of it. Now you have smart contracts where the terms of the contracts are actually locked. So if a supplier misses delivery, the penalty would kick in automatically and would be charged accordingly. The transparency of the transaction also across suppliers moving materials is interesting. When I was working with Toyota, they were implementing it into spare parts and how they can track those spare parts as well. A lot of great technology going in there. IoT, or Internet of Things, in real time, whether it's the RFID part, and you know, back RFID cost was active RFIDs versus passive, used to be very high. Now it's really becoming affordable, but how you use it. You know, do we use it on a container, or do we use it at a pallet, or do we use it at a box level? And what kind of information do we use from it? When you use it on an asset, what kind of information that we're gonna get? We're gonna, you know, what kind of sensors we're gonna have attached to the RFIDs? You know, viscosity of the material, temperature of an engine, and so forth. What do I do with that information? You know, if it's an oil change, or oil, you know, viscosity of oil going low, then it would trigger you to schedule a maintenance. It would prep procurement so that they would buy the right parts and right time, so that when the asset back in the depot, they can have all of that scheduled. Very interesting use cases around that. Autonomous vehicles is growing, and I don't know if you tried one of these, but you know, if you were in Austin or San Fran, you've probably seen those Waymo automated vehicles that are running like Uber. Same thing is the look in terms of how you do those autonomous vehicles on the truck side. And there's a lot of, you know, companies are looking into the drones as well. In delivery is one thing, but also in quality inspection. You're seeing a lot of O&G companies and petroleum services companies are using drones for inspections as well. In agriculture, the same thing. In chemicals, the same thing. A lot of my clients are starting to use drones, and they're making a great business case for it and how using it. Digital twin is a very interesting technology where companies are simulating basically actions and causes of certain actions on the supply chain. And it's basically how you run those what if scenarios. I'm working with a client right now that's mainly focused on how do we develop a BPM, business process management software that can tie different systems together, and how we can change those parameters, and what's the effect of that on order delivery, on profitability and such. And there's a lot of different applications for digital twin as well. Robotics, definitely an automation warehouse. So we talked about AGVs and importance. I think 5G as well is one of the key technologies that we're seeing in terms of providing real-time tracking, and you know, having that access to speed and accurate speed of moving data is paradigm for a lot of industries to have that real-time tracking. Cloud-based supply chain, it's been around, platforms has been around for a long time. You see a lot of the, you know, if you're involved in ERP, you'll see a lot of the new ERPs that are really tapping on using that technology for sure. For the sake of time, I would just want to sum up, you know, some of the challenges. I think the challenges are always going to be around how you adapt your supply chain for disruption. What is it that I can do? How much do I need to invest in that? Do I have a business continuity plan or not? Do I have redundancy in my system or not? Do I need to, you know, source for different countries or not? These are always discussions, supply chain and companies that they really want to be aware of, and how you do it. Demand forecasting is becoming huge now that a lot of companies are very close to the consumer. They want to be able to measure that consumer behavior. They want to adapt their forecasting accordingly. The whole point here is to how to manage your working capital in a smart way, so that you won't have stockouts, overstocking, or excess inventory. Especially in today's environment where the product life cycle is too short between, initiation, growth, maturity, and decline, you can see that the life cycle is very short and new innovations are already coming up. So nobody want to end up discounting or with excess inventory. So how do you really tune your forecast and inventory strategies and technologies accordingly to do that? Supply relationship is big in terms of how collaboration is evolving with suppliers. You have suppliers now that are more than, it's not a venture, but the relationship with suppliers now is bringing a lot of value to companies, from innovation, from being attached to a mission to, drive down costs, bottlenecks, and hard times. We've seen the example of that during the pandemic and how important it is. So it's definitely valuable. Let me stop here if you guys don't mind, and because I'm really keen on getting questions, and if we have time, and if anybody interested in pursuing this more, we can definitely do it. But let me actually say this one more thing in 1 minute left. I'm sorry, I promise. If you really want to, get involved in supply chain, the Association of Supply Chain is a premier, organization that I'm proud to be part of, and has a lot of value that can bring in from education, from conferences, from even, reaching out to professionals that can help. It's a great source. If you want to learn about supply chain, even within your own organization, you can reach out to your operations, finance, procurement, manufacturing functions. I'm sure they'll lead you in terms of defining how they define supply chain. They can answer those questions about how we are integrating. You can ask them all those smart questions that really can bring in value to your function or your project. And yep. Thanks so much for your patience here, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Mohannad. This is excellent. Really learned a lot, and I'm sure the whole group learned a lot. It's a specialized area, but touches our lives on a daily level for sure. I saw a couple of other questions. I raised my hand second, but I think is it the ASA, the AAAEA capital area? Is that you?
Yeah, it's me. Is that okay?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. You can ask a question, then I'll ask, and then Samir, please.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much, Mohannad. Yeah, it's really highlight good presentation. I loved it actually. I mean, I used to work as a consultant for almost like 25, 30 years. Now I'm in the public sector. So when we order materials, it's really impacting, it's big concern now just to make sure, we have the materials we needed to, repair or fix or replace a water main or something. And then some of this really critical because some of those transmission lines we work on are the really supply maybe I'm gonna say I don't know maybe 250,000 residents. So you mentioned a lot of these challenges we are just facing now, but you're right, there is a new challenge these days because sometimes when we just order materials, if we need to order something, they are now talking about they don't have the resources even to make our products anymore because some of those products come from overseas. You mentioned that a lot about, different countries impacting, your products these days. Mm-hmm. And it's really concerning factor now. It's just these days, it's not that even business as usual that, it's okay. We need this product. Okay, we have it in stock or we can give it to you in a month. Now they're talking about like a year, and that will impact a lot, even locally, because as I just mentioned that some of those projects we work on, some of them is just emergency repair. We have to do it immediately as soon as we can. Sure. So there is more challenges to what you just all these factors you mentioned and the challenges we have. So there is a new challenges now we have to face also.
Yeah. And how, I mean, I can relate to what you're going through, and everybody is. And as you can see, there's a lot of interesting strategies about how you do this. But procurement, I mean, the solutions are a lot. But this is where we talk about resilience, right? How do you build your supply chain for resilience in procurement side? So, I don't want to go deep into it, but it's, you always categorize your products or your suppliers in a certain, quadrant. And the ones that, that are very important for you, you have to have a strategy for that, different than the ones that have different sources, multiple suppliers, and you're not worried about them. Strategic sourcing is very important, and we have a lot of, strategic sourcing expertise here that would tell you about how important that is. If you're in the F&B, or that sugar and wheat and coffee now is not easy to get. So how do you develop the right strategy to do that? How do you craft a strategy that not just one supplier, but from different geographies? I have a client who knows that he cannot depend on China. So he went and he sourced one in Vietnam, one in Thailand. Okay, now they're looking in Latin America. So they see that coming in advance, and they plan accordingly a strategy for sourcing the material. Now, you're seeing, as you're in the problem, you get to think, are you going to start doing strategic sourcing now, looking at different suppliers, open your manufacturing, invest in a supplier locally so that they can gear up? There's a lot of strategies for sure. So I can definitely relate to that.
Thank you, Mohannad. I have a quick question, and then we'll go. I see many people, Samir, then Tali, then Hassan. My question, Mohannad, is really related to this complex environment we're all living in right now, with the tariffs and the trade war with the whole world, really, not just China. And we have clients who are struggling a lot on different things. So my question, Mohannad, is from your side as an expert in supply chain management. Like, even if someone like ABB or Apple want to open a factory, which is great news for the US economy, aren't there so many issues, like they have to find the new land, they have to build a factory, they have to hire people, there's the cost of getting the machines, the currency exchanges, the transportation, the disruption. As a small example, I learned just last week, where I'm ignorant in these things, but I read a lot of different sources, that the rare earth materials that come from 60% or 70% from China are used in many, many products, including cell phones and F-35s and all that stuff. So that will a huge disruption in the whatever supply chains we're working on. And the last thing is, isn't that a huge, major disruption for all these poor planners and forecasting people? That I was one of them in the telecom network and with Cisco and Nokia and Motorola, and it was I had to work in all these unknowns. But isn't that the current environment? Isn't that huge pressure for all the mid-size to large companies? Thank you.
Oh yeah, it is. I mean, it's definitely. I mean, I'm hearing it every day. I mean, and the strategies are interesting. So there are two elements here. There's the long-term strategy again, and the short-term strategy. So the long-term strategy is exactly what you said, right? It's, we're gonna build, factories, we're gonna build capacity, all of that. It's gonna take time, right? Meanwhile, the short-term strategy, it really depends on how people are doing it. So again, Apple just flied in, 600 tons or something in iPhones, and then next day they waived the electronics and everything from the tariffs. I have clients who have their material on ships right now, and it's gonna hit by tariff. What did they do? They passed this, extra part of the contract, force majeure, to their client. They passed it. You'll see a lot of that happen as a short-term strategy. Short-term strategies are varying from sourcing different suppliers and renegotiating deals. I mean, this falls under force majeure, right? So how do you really exercise that term? It's going to be thing. This is one thing. The other thing is what you're going to be interesting, again, from a supply chain, from a supply demand perspective, is how prices are going to adjust. Because I have another client, you know, in the solar energy business. They sell solar panels. They make, sorry, solar panels. And, you know, when this happened 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they basically put in more tariffs on buying those solar panels from China. So as a result, all of a sudden, this companies in Arizona, they are flooded with orders. So it's gonna be based on the price. It's not that you cannot get the solar panel from China. They can, but the price point is gonna play a point. It's gonna play a big game. How you adjust the dynamic, is it gonna be you know, there are terms in pricing, how flexible in pricing, elasticity of a product is going to play into the game. The ones that, you know, the customer is able to pay the extra for it, end up extra for it. The ones that are not as are elastic, truly elastic, they will see some changes. So there's going to be a different, you know, cost structure. There's going to be different pricing mechanisms. I can see that either to compensate for it or to adjust. And yeah, it's going to be interesting dynamics for sure.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mohammed. Samir, تفضل.
شكرا Mohammed. Hi, Mohammed. Excellent presentation, and thank you for the invite. Allah يخليك. Thank you so much. Alhamdulillah. Everything is good. Thank you so much. You know, I really enjoyed it. You know, I got a comment and a question. The question, maybe, you know, with the United States, you know, being almost used to be the manufacturing capital of the world back in the days, and with FedEx and UPS in terms of you know, supply chain, and it's the only country that you drive around and you see this highway you know, highways of the I-95s and all that stuff. How is China, now that China is the factory of the world, how is China has changed the system of supply chain, if there is a change compared to the United States, when the United States was back in the 60s and the 70s, I would say almost maybe mid 80s, was the leading manufacturer. Do you see a change, you know, in that? That's the one question. The other questions, the other question that I have for you is, you know, with the tariff right now and Boeing right now trying to put some of their stuff in the news lately to make some of its plane in Mexico. How is that, you know, cars being made in Mexico, cars made in Canada, how is that, you know, affecting the you know, the market?
But pertaining to the Mexico part, how is manufacturing in Mexico?
Yeah. I mean, now Boeing is trying to get now in the news, trying to get some of its, you know, Boeing was always 100%. And I did visit the Boeing factory in Everett, Washington, back in the days, almost 20 years ago, maybe 15 years ago. Now Boeing is talking about for the first time producing some of their stuff in Mexico. And building almost a $200 million facility there for cheap labors to compete with you know, with Airbus, and also China is right now with some kind of new commercial planes. You know, and now the Trump administration is trying to slow that down and keep everything in the United States. How do you see the supply chain there for Boeing, you know, going to be affected?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, you know, on this one. It's always interesting because in aerospace specifically, it's very interesting to get a supplier in Mexico and get your suppliers to follow you as well is another problem. I mean, I don't know if he's on the call or not, but you know, I have a client that, you know, built a whole manufacturing facility in Mexico. I think it was in Monterrey, if I'm not wrong. and in the CPG industry, and they invested a lot into it. And after they invested into it, their supply didn't follow. They did not want to follow. So it's definitely an element. If you're thinking about it from that way, if you're thinking about it from a technical aspect, if your question has to do with the technical aspect of how is it going to be and how it's going to it's going to work, it really depends on the, you know, what kind of parts are they going to build, and if it's the avionics part of it, if it's the part out of it, it's different. I mean, you know, pretty much I mean, there are countries that are building parts of the Airbus. Emirates are building part of the Airbus, the wing. And I visited the factory. I mean, everybody. I mean, there's a lot of suppliers. It's like the automotive. There's definitely a lot of suppliers. So from a technical standpoint, it depends again on the product, but I don't know how sophisticated is it. From a tariff standpoint, a few questions about the tariff standpoint. I'm sure, especially it's an aerospace, you know, industry, it's going to be a different treatment. I don't know if it's going to follow tariffs or not. That would be interesting to know. But back to your question, which is very interesting as well, is the China factor, right? I mean, China is, I mean, I have not visited, but, you know, I have business partners and I work with companies that definitely procure from China. The competitive advantage is becoming huge. How did it happen? We can start with the labor part. We can talk about Jack Welch and how he initiated a lot of that, and he was the reason for that during industrialization, even though he did a lot of that good stuff. But it's becoming their competitive advantage because also the technology. I mean, you would get, you know, the power of not R&D, the power of how they are able to very quickly build a product for you from design and have to manufacturing, and how they can really make this happen with the cost element of it as well, but with how the speed of it is what's really interesting. I mean, I'm working with clients that would tell me that anything I can do, and I want to not re-engineer, but I want to design, I would just send them the design, and they can ramp up. Not just they would involve me with they would reach out to the right suppliers to get the right materials, the best quality, the best machineries, the supplier network, the quality of the products that it's produced from design to, you know, to retail is amazing. That is a function of, again, manpower, technology, governance, support from government maybe as well, that they finance that kind of things. I think that got them on to really master that capability is one thing. Second thing is, believe it or not, I mean, back to the Jack Welch model, but, you know, this is what companies decided to do, right? So I worked for, you know, companies that outsource. I worked for Accenture. I mean, they're known for outsourcing. I mean, when you at the end of the day, when you offer to your client, you know, I can make this with $5 or $1, which way do you want me to go? They're always going to go with the $1, okay? Unless there are some value attributes to your process that gets you to want to go one way or another, then definitely you can persuade them otherwise. But it's the economics of it that's becoming part of it. And you know, and I'm you know, this is what I mean. It's not a problem to manufacture somewhere, if you ask me. I mean, it's you know, in all full pharma companies, for example, they don't own, most of them, they decided that manufacture is not their thing. It's not their competency. They want to pour their investments in R&D. Okay. And a lot of the farmers do that. CPG, same thing. You know, we have different models. You have the PepsiCo model, you have the Coke model. The money is not in the manufacturing and the bottling. The money is in the marketing and you know, we want to focus our investment in marketing and R&D and sales and all of that. So manufacturing is becoming not the nucleus company. Let me put it in the supply chain terms. The nucleus company is not the manufacturing company anymore. It's the company that controls the supply chain. Who do you think have the power, Walmart or P&G in the market?
I think Walmart.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right?
For sure.
So it's shifting. I mean, you know, the industrial engineer I am, I can relate to your question in terms of, you know, I would love to see more factories. And it would be great because, you know, it's not just building a factory, it's building the whole supply chain, having a warehouse, having, you know, machineries in there, having, you know, trucks in there. I mean, all of this is still there, but the engineering power and all of that is important. And the you know, hiring the people and all of that is important. You know, you remind me when one time with Clinton came out and he was visiting Detroit and he was talking, and this is not political, by the way, but he said it at some point, you know, it was part of the strategy. You know, he was talking to a worker, I think at that time, and he was talking about, you know, I have good news and bad news for you. Good news is, bad news is you might not get your job back. But the good news is you are going to elevate your skill set and you're going to get a better job that does something else. So it's also the value add or the upskilling, you know, strategy or the nature of the country that we live in that, you know, got us to channel, you know, our skill set accordingly. You know, I came, you know, I came to this country, what, 25 years ago? And I was an industrial engineer and I was looking for any factory to work in. I love machines. I want to work with, you know, in the factory and all of that. I mean, for me, it's different, but I could not find one, you know. That's why I ended up, you know, miserable as a consultant. So, you know, it's always market dynamic that gets you to, yeah, to take your skills.
But that's where the money is. Just one more, just a comment I want to tell you regarding switching of businesses.
We just want to be respectful to the time also, please. If you can be quick with your question, because we have 3 more questions.
No, okay, no, go ahead.
تفضل. Please ask your question.
No, it was a comment when he was talking about, it was interesting that McDonald's, I found out McDonald's last quarter made $7.3 billion in profit. And it wasn't from selling burgers. They made it from real estate. And they made it from, what do you call it, franchising. It wasn't from selling burgers. It was a very interesting article to know that McDonald's made 7.3 million from real estate and, you know, anyway, that was just a comment to make to show you how things have changed, you know. But anyway, thank you so much, man. And Mohannad, appreciate it. Really interesting, you know.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
Yep, definitely. Yeah.
Thank you. Great question. Just one quick comment to confirm what Mohannad was saying. I was Vice President, General Manager at Motorola in around 2000, and I was under huge pressure to cut down resources in North America and move them to China and India. And I resisted as long as I could. A year later, I was shopped, me and 4 other vice presidents and 6,000 people in the US and Canada. So yes, these things were happening, and it's all about cost, as you said, Mohannad. And you know, we're capitalists. We follow where the capital and the money and efficiencies. Thank you. Great answer, Mohannad. The next in line is Tali. Please, quick question, and then we have Hassan and Saad. Tfadal, Tali.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Melham. Thank you, Mohannad. Thanks for the invite. Great presentation. One comment, I'll be very brief, and one question. The comment is, it's very informative presentation. Thank you, excellent. It's an eye-opener, especially for someone like me being outside the supply chain process. I didn't know it's that complex and very complicated, it seems. I've always been on the customer side, meaning like I manage projects, we order material. Never thought that so much goes into it. So what I can take out of this presentation, that I'll be a better customer and understanding when we have delays, and you know, when the manufacturer or the vendor, you know, they face some delivery or supply chain issues. So thank you again for that. My question is, do you think, in light of what is happening and like what you talked about, Mohannad, and what Mr. Melham said, with all the disruptions in the supply chain market, and it's funny that you mentioned Jack Welch, the GE CEO in the 80s and I think the 90s too. back then GE grew through acquisition. They were acquiring companies left and right just to facilitate their products and the manufacturing of their products. Do you think large companies are gonna rethink the existing strategies they have now? Like, for example, one product maybe will have like 100 components going into one product, and those 100 components maybe they come from 25, 30 different countries. Do you think they will rethink that, and for the sake of minimizing risk, that they would rather, I mean, of course they did that to hit the, like you indicated earlier, the right price point. Do you think maybe they will rethink that and say, you know what, I don't want to have to deal with this, I want to minimize my risk, I'm limiting my sources for these components to maybe 2 or 3 companies or countries, and I'm gonna look locally, and rather than trying to get these components, from all over the globe. And so that's my question, and thank you again. Excellent presentation.
Yeah. So what's going to happen is, when you dissect this again, there's a service component and outsourcing and products, that the component as well that you buy or source. And both of them, whomever is sourcing out any of these, different products from China, let's say, they already started to look at it. I mean, my clients now are already looking into, oh, we gotta look for a different outsourcing. In fact, one of my clients knew that's gonna happen, and he didn't want to put, he didn't want to put the eggs in one basket, and he's selling a very high volume, high margin product from China. And he knew that if he depend on one supplier, even though the cost was cost of the product that they would get from China is much cheaper, they decided to diversify their product. So when you do strategic sourcing, and that we can talk about this, you have to have a strategy for, again, the type of commodity or services that you're buying. Okay, you have to use an ABCD rule, and without getting involved into it, but you have to treat those A suppliers. Okay, those are the sole source type of suppliers, not multi-source type of suppliers. Sole source suppliers means there's only 1 or 2 in the world that makes that in a certain category, and how you develop that relationship and how you develop those contracts, versus the multi-source type of commodities that has many suppliers and it's like a commodity product. So with the sole suppliers that are from China, if companies are having that problem with sole source in China, yeah, it's going to take a while to switch. And that switching suppliers is not easy at all. So how you do that is important. There's a lot of mitigation scenarios that are happening now. So from a strategic standpoint, you definitely need to plan for that ahead. But now, what companies are going to do to combat, I'm not going to use hedge or anything, but to combat all of that, it's going to be interesting. I mean, you have different mechanisms that companies already are using to hedge prices, commodity prices, and activate those contracts. Is it gonna work in a force majeure environment with this one? That's another thing. But for ones that are able to negotiate how the road forward is gonna be with buying those materials on those prices, it's gonna be very interesting to see. Are they going to budge on the prices? Are they going to pass the prices to the customer, which usually is now the scenario that I'm seeing in the market. Everybody's passing it to the customer. So it's going to play a huge role. Now, how do you develop the next steps in terms of diversifying your supply base is going to be interesting. How do you do it with pace? Like I said, how do you do strategic sourcing? So strategic sourcing is the practice, and how do you set up and how do you develop negotiation terms? How do you develop should costs? for your product, which is basically dissecting the cost of your end product into assemblies and how you share that with your suppliers so that they know what's their part of the cost and how they can contribute to that. A lot of things. You might see a lot of acquisitions on the supplier side for companies to vertically integrate, which happened already in a lot of industries. So when you buy your supplier, you're guaranteed that you'd secure specific specific volumes. So the ones who did that might reap some benefit of economy of scale and acquisition that they would, they can absorb some of that 25% or whatever extra cost that's in their cost margins and make up for it. This is another thing that you're going to see. And there's other strategies that you'll see as well. But it depends on how much leverage you have with your supplier. What's your other options? How quick are you to deploy different source on the short run? And then in the long run, I think companies know better now how to deal with diversifying their supplier base. Too much concentration, customer or supplier concentration is what we call it. Always, comes with a risk. So definitely needs to be looked at in different angles. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yep. Yes, sir. You did. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mohanad.
Thank you very much, Mohannad. MashaAllah, excellent answer. Next is Hassan's iPhone. I don't know, Hassan, who you are, but go ahead.
I know Hassan.
Yes. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Mohannad, for a great presentation. You can conclude that this is really more informative about, people involved in manufacturing or businesses that rely on supply chain. However, I just want to emphasize on the importance of supply chain, even on individuals who are not even have a business or rely on that supply chain in different way. You touched base on that earlier about tariff and how the tariffs are gonna increase the prices of everything that comes from, for example, right now is China, but who knows what we're going to end up with. So the question here, how can we make everyone in this meeting, even they're not involved in the supply chain, or they don't, or they care less about, supply chain in a matter that they're not involved in business or manufacturing, but they're impacting their life. For example, if they want to plan to buy a car, that the prices are going higher, so you probably should have bought a car before that tariff had impacted. So my question to you is, if you can give us like a category or list of information that could really open our eyes in a way that the tariffs and the everything that's happening right now is going to impact the prices that we are as individual consumers are going to be facing. For example, stocks. If you invest in the stocks, you have Amazon. Do you think, how is that tariffs going to impact the Amazon sales, and would that impact the stock prices? So if you can have an idea, since you're more involved in those supply chains and who could be affected or not, if you can give us like a category or items that we can pay attention more to how individuals can really be impacted with those tariffs.
Yeah. I mean, great question, Hassan, as always. And Hassan is a supply chain practitioner and professional, and he definitely always have the smart questions as well. And your question, Hassan, is it's a function of consumer behavior. If you're asking me, if you're not if you're not a supply chain practitioner and you're just a consumer, what's your role in that? Versus a supply chain practitioner who would have the decision points to do that. So as a consumer, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a list in my mind, but I think the key things that I always wonder and think about is, how is that going to affect our buying behavior? right? So to your point, should we buy local and even if the price is going to be higher or not? But do we know that price is going to be higher or not is another thing. Okay. So again, elasticity of demand is going to play a role in terms of how, if people, won't pay that 25% and that would deter them from buying something, guess what's going to happen? Price is going to go down. Okay. So, but if people continue to buy it, okay, it's going to keep, its power of pricing and it would maintain that pricing. And guess what? You will be paying for the 25%. So you pay the 25% extra, I would say, if you allow the pricing to stay. But if the volume's gonna go down because of the pricing, this is when they're gonna see, oh, every product that sell, it has more than 25% in profit margin to start with. Okay. You have, in consumer product goods and stuff, I'm talking about consumer product goods because it's something that we buy every day. I think there's definitely more around 40% in margins. So it's going to be up to companies to pass you the 25% increase and you pay it or eat from their margin. Okay. Now they're making 40%. Okay. Are they going to be able to budge on the 25%, take it from the 40% or pass it to you? So that's going to be an interesting call to see what's that going to happen. On the stock side, I invest as well, but it's becoming interesting to see how prices are changing, how stock prices are behaving every day. I wouldn't say it's really math based on valuation. Tara is here. You might ask him this question. He's my investment advisor when it comes to stocks. He's the one who tells me what makes sense. But it's gonna be interesting to see past that behavioral, abrupt behavioral buying and hence pricing, what's going to make sense in terms of buying or not buying. It's a little question that's a factor of industry for sure that you buy. What's going to happen to that industry? It could be a lot of things. What else we can do? I think the buying thing is going to be key. I think again, if you question about non-supply chain professionals, I think the consumer behavior is going to dictate how much we buy what for how much is what's going to make prices either stick or not. Right now, I think everybody's trying to pass this and see if we're still going to buy. If that succeeds, guess what? Those new prices are the new prices. If we limit our consumption or our buying habits, definitely prices are dynamic. The other options definitely is going to be it's a supply. It's always supply and demand, right? Does that answer your question, Hassan?
Yes, thank you. That's good. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
I'm not going to get present stocks. I'm sorry, man.
No, thank you. I just want to give other people a chance to ask. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohannad. Thank you, Hassan. Last question, just out of respect also for the speaker, because والله shukran for your time also, Mohannad. Saad Hassan, تفضل.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll try to keep this brief. One of the main trends that you had discussed towards the end of the presentation was sustainability. And this is a big topic that they taught at the university as well that I went to. At least they were trying to make it a larger part of the curriculum. So as far as sustainability goes, there's a lot more maybe focus on it from retail businesses or consumer packaged goods because there's pressure from the customers to improve the sustainable packaging or sustainable delivery, or like if even in the luxury goods you have companies like Pandora who only use recycled gold and recycled silver and lab-grown diamonds, but we don't see that kind of pressure maybe from heavier of the industries, construction, robotics, and things like that. So my question is, how do you make sustainability and sustainable supply chains, because they are expensive, how do you make it more attractive to the businesses? What kind of pressures do they have to experience in order to shift the operating model towards a more sustainable one?
This is an excellent question, Sam. Thank you so much. So I think how to make it, so sustainability is a big agenda. And, to your question, to what you just said, it's not cheap to really invest in sustainability. So when you look in Europe, the regulations definitely is a big push. Government regulation is a big push for companies to adapt to those specific sustainability, the percentage of recycled materials in a specific product, how you dispose, how they charge for waste, how do they have a whole procedure around, waste control and all of that. Definitely the mechanism of how they abide by it is driven by regulation. In the US, we do have regulation on sustainability, and there's a lot of companies that takes the ISOs and follow the GRI as well in terms of what procedures they have around sustainability and on and so forth. And and that might drive it's more of a conscious, not a conscious, it's more of a business actually a driver for them. But it's also how they're gonna monetize on it. And that's another driver for companies to answer this part of the question. It's how you're gonna monetize on the sustainability agenda and how it's gonna make sense. So companies are looking at, if I'm gonna implement sustainability, you have to show me how am I gonna save on my material cost? How am I gonna save if I buy the electric car? How am I gonna save if I turn my manufacturing to green, adopt a green policy? Every time there is a sustainability, environmental sustainability initiative that is gonna be tied to cost reduction or top line growth, hence price differentiating also sustainable product or and sell, they're always gonna be adapted. In fact, I know your question is skeptical of adapting sustainability, but you'd be surprised. I mean, it definitely is not cheap. And I'm not saying that everybody who's doing environmental sustainable, selling environmental sustainable product are making money, but it's becoming a huge differentiator in the market for products to sell. In fact, in deals, when I look at companies, everybody's interested in a company that has a sustainability agenda. It's easy to sell to banks, to investors. It's more future looking. It shows the rigor of the current owners. So it's becoming more of I wanna definitely use that. If you're doing business with the government, I think there is some, also terms there that they want you to abide by in terms of how much are you really using waste and how much of your material are sustainable and all of that. So there are contractual requirements as well by the government contracts that are pushing industries to do that. So different dynamics, no doubt, and I think it's going in the positive. But mind you something, and that it's the focus is on the environmental thing, but there are different other elements within sustainability that are now becoming more in focus for the industry. When you think of sustainability, it's environment, it's social, and it's economics. I mentioned example of what economics mean. In terms of selling based on profits, don't waste a lot of resources for small margins. Be smart about it for the long run. This is sustainability, in a lot of economic sustainability, a lot of sense, and we can drill through that later. But the social one is very important. The social part is very important. It's the diversity and all of that, but it's really how companies are committing to social and cultural aspects. So there is a lot of case studies in my mind just because of time, but there are companies that are very, they measure sustainability in terms of how involved they are in the society. Okay, when you have the investor that's building a new steel factory in Kentucky, okay, he bought a town. Okay, so part of his pitch to the county was, what is it that he's gonna give back? He's gonna build rehab centers, he's gonna build X thing. So that is becoming part of the sustainability agenda for companies, is to how to attract or how to convince cities in bringing their business to town, what value they're going to bring, how many people they're going to employ, what they're going to add to to the economic development of the city. So these are other measures of sustainability as well that companies are focused on. Make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Mohannad. Before we close, wanna really appreciate it. A very informative and educational webinar and discussion. I also want to encourage other people who are not members to join us. Just go to the website, and it's $50 a year, and we will have more conversations like this. We also look for different sponsors. If briefly for the next presentation, Yusuf, do you want to just briefly mention your next presentation, and then inshallah I'll give it back to Thoraya to close the session. Please, thank you.
Yes, of course. First and foremost, thank you, Mohannad, for a very good and educational webinar. I learned a lot today about the supply chain management, and even hearing you answer the questions were very helpful too. There were some great questions here. And yeah, as Ray mentioned, as part of the AAEA DC's initiative for the year, we have webinars lined up once a month for our members and non-members to join. And inshallah, for May, I'll be presenting on green infrastructure and site development, more so from a civil engineering background, but obviously open to everybody, and will be catered to the civil engineers and non-civil engineers, architects or not. I think it's a great way to learn about site development and green infrastructure and how we benefit from that. I know it's also supposed to be in person next month. We'll obviously also have the Zoom set up, so if you can't come in person, you're more than welcome to join on the Zoom call. In person, it'll be in Falls Church, Virginia, the Thomas Jefferson Library, and I believe it's on May 21st, but you'll definitely get emails or posts to confirm the exact date, time, and all the good information with that. And inshallah, beyond that, we'll have more webinars set up for June, July, August, all the way to the end of the year. And we also encourage any of the listeners and members, if you have any sort of suggestions as to what you'd like to hear about or which sort of speakers we can bring in, you're more than welcome to send that forward to us to consider, and we'll look for those professionals within the area or within the country as well to present.
Thank you, Yusuf. Thoraya, تفضلي.
Thank you so much, Mohannad. Really, in behalf of everybody, we'll think about the great webinar presentation, and looking forward to have you, participate with our association. It's not it's everyone's association. You can direct us if we need to do or improve, please. And also, as Yusuf mentioned, we have monthly webinars and in person as well. We are welcoming you to participate whenever you are available. And again, thank you so much for your time and your contribution. It's Saturday, so I really appreciate your time and everyone's time.
It was an honor and a pleasure to be part of you. Thank you, Thoraya. If it wasn't you, I probably wouldn't be here. And so thank you for taking a chance on me, I guess. And I don't know if they'll do it again, but I thank you for that. When I told everybody about that presentation, the name of AAE was definitely out there. So and